As you know, the training we're going to do today is one of our advanced trainings that we offer to our aided members. And the topic today we're going to cover is a case study, specifically a Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI case. And this is an opportunity for aided members to learn more about applying the work incentives that are available through Social Security. And we're doing that through this case study as an example of that actual application. So the agenda is Kevin will be reviewing the case with you. And then when that is all completed, it's going to be kind of opening up for some specific questions and discussion of the use of those work incentives and other questions you might have in regards to individuals that you're supporting, specifically related to their Social Security work incentives. We recommend throughout this training that you go ahead and take notes. It's going to help you to be able to participate in the discussion. There's going to be some specific, idiosyncrasies about this particular case that you would want to maybe have notes of as Kevin walks you through it. The last point here we want to bring to your attention is for those of you who are certified as a benefits and work incentives practitioner through Cornell University, this training has been approved for 2 hours of continuing education credit. So thanks to Kevin for getting that all arranged with the folks at Cornell. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Kevin to pull up the PowerPoint presentation and get us underway.
Okay, thanks, Mary Lynn, and thanks for joining us today, folks. It's let me just see if this shows up here.
It looks like it's coming here, Kevin. There you go. You've got it.
Okay, very good. Very good. Okay, so first things first, it looks like we have a crew of folks who have certification or are on their way to final certification. In the case of Nikki, I know that's the case. So that's great because what we're covering today will not be 101 level information. We're going to dive in as if you understand the disability system. And, we put together a study here that kind of mimics, the average person we might see come through that wants our assistance. It is a little tricky to provide a case study in a webinar platform, so we're kind of experimenting with this flow today to see how this works. We'd appreciate your feedback. You can let us know after today's training is completed. And if you have any suggestions for improvement, we certainly listen to each of you, so let us know. So I think with that, we're going to dive in. I have no idea how long this is going to take. We certainly have enough time carved out for this. And as long as there's discussion in the opportunities you'll be provided and people, take part in that discussion process, I think it'll be very useful. So let's just dive in. The reason we didn't give you this in advance is the version that you're going to see also includes a lot of the answers. So we wanted you to really think this through. As I'm going to give you time at key points in this case study to kind of review the information in the slide, and then we'll reconvene and we'll kind of think about those things. Okay, so that's kind of the way we're going to try this. Up front, I want to give you information about this fella that we're going to talk about today, who I call Steve. So we're going to find out a little bit of information. We're going to review some things. But just know that you might not always have enough information, and that's actually purposeful. That's the way this is designed. So we're going to do the best with the information we have, and based on what you understand about benefits, based on what you understand about the ticket program, we're going to kind of combine all that today, which is going to make this a little more interesting, I think, in terms of a case study. So I'm going to kind of review this with you, and my recommendation, again, what Mary Lynn said is true. Try to, when we're going through this, kind of take key notes that you think are important and that you think will influence decisions from your background and understanding Social Security disability benefits. So make sure you take down some of those key notes as we progress. That's how we're going to try this today. So our initial assessment of Steve is that he came to one of our outreach events, all right? And he wanted to meet with somebody afterwards, which is the hope, really, of these events, right? Okay, you hear the information, it gets you intrigued about the options that people have for work, right? And then, hopefully the person wants to speak to you more about ticket afterwards. That's what happened here with Steve. Came to one of your outreach events, and this is what you learned about Steve in your initial assessment and kind of review of some of the intake information you collected. Steve's 42. He is married and has 2 children, ages 12 and 15. He's been on disability benefits since December 2011. He has a back injury, and he's concerned about losing his health care insurance as a result of his return to work, since he still regularly sees his doctor. He's concerned about lifting requirements with any potential job that he might have, and which is why he wishes to target management positions in retail. That's kind of his goal that he states to you. And his doctor does support this. And by the way, this is a small crew. Rachel, you have control of muting there. I didn't know that about the phone, so we learned that today. But everyone else, simply just hover over your name and near the mic, and you can unmute yourselves if you have questions along the way. Okay, please just don't hesitate to jump in. Okay, now we're going to look at some more information about Steve, his past work history. So Steve is currently unemployed at the time you do this intake with him, but he states that he worked 5 months last year. He's had jobs in retail in the past, and he's held a couple positions in management. He does now have a minor gap in his employment. As far as his educational background, he has a high school diploma, and he has some business management college coursework under his belt, but no college degree. You sort out that his employment goal is that he would like to work in retail management again. He wants to start part-time and then hopefully move to full-time hours, 40 hours a week, which he does state he's willing to do for the right position. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? A lot of folks come to us with that thought. And welcome, Kayleen. Okay, let's move forward with more information about Steve. We got to have some basics here. Steve states he could use some assistance brushing up on his computer skills. And he might need your support with things such as his resume, cover letters, and how to make sure he's connected to all the potential leads he should be. And Kayleen, just for your benefit, I've been telling everybody this when they join. Just go ahead. There you go. You got it. But don't hesitate to unmute and inject along the way here for the training. Oh, and Barbara's here too. Great. So he's going to need some of the basic supports that we offer, right? Resumes, cover letters, and so forth. In the interview, you note that he's personable, but he stated he's not been on an interview for a management position in many years, and he is concerned he won't be able to land a management job without a degree. More information that's kind of pertinent to the case study is that he has his own vehicle. It's, so he can get around. He indicated he would like to invest in a home eventually, because at this time he's renting a home for himself and his family. He is not receiving services from VR at this point in time or from another EN. So now with that, I have some thoughts for you here in terms of your initial impressions. And this is the point at which I don't want it silent. So I do want you to unmute your line and tell me what your thoughts on this. So in terms of these initial impressions, I know that's limited information you just got. But based on that information, what kind of services do you think Steve would be eligible for to assist him in the return to work? Now, I want you to think more globally here, and then we're going to narrow things down. But what services could Steve be eligible for? Don't be shy. You know the answers. Remember that your injection of your answers is helping everybody else. That's the way these case studies work.
I think that he'd be really appropriate for ticket. And he'd probably also benefit from working with his local one-stop career center.
Okay, that's Rachel. Okay, got it, Rachel. So you're thinking maybe ticket, maybe the one-stop, are possible sources. Good, good, good. Other thoughts?
Kevin, do you want to back up your slides just a little bit in case we didn't catch everything?
Sure. Let's look. Let me do that. There we go. Okay, so I'm just gonna let you look at the information while we're thinking about this. Michelle thinks he might be would be a good candidate for ticket. Nikki says he's definitely going to need that resume assistance, career counseling, educational counseling to start. Yeah. I agree with all those things. I mean, there are some other things he could be potentially eligible for, right, that I haven't heard. What other service might he be eligible for? Definitely could be pass. Yep. Nikki puts in there. What about VR? Is that possible? Leaving more information. Yes, but no. You think you've read my mind, and you might have, but and there's other services that he might need at this point that so you just heard all this stuff from Steve, and he is thinking about this work option. Michelle says VR certainly could be an option, but he seems independent enough that he might be a good fit for ticket. And Rachel's saying, yeah, but maybe he doesn't need that level of support unless he wants to finish his degree. Good points, excellent points. Benefits planning, he probably needs that too, doesn't he? Right? Thinking more globally. Didn't he say, yep, benefits advisement? What else did he say he wanted to do? He said he wanted to own a home. What other service might help with that? I'm just trying to get you to think. There you go, Michelle. Yeah. So financial services, right? I just want you kind of put your cap on that helps you think globally when you're in an initial interview with somebody. I mean, we might be an answer, right, as a ticket provider, but I want you to just think more globally when people are calling. What are all the things that could support him? Family self-sufficiency, absolutely. Now you're getting the idea. So there's all these things running through your head. You don't have enough information yet, but there's all these ideas and thoughts that you're coming up with in terms of options for Steve, but now we have to really figure out more about Steve. So what would we do next to sort this out further? And here are some of those thoughts, right? And a lot of those were mentioned. Eden, or ticket was mentioned. American Job Center was mentioned. And then I kind of prompted you, but certainly when we think about all the things he's got in front of him, and maybe you're not thinking this way because each of you have, well, most of you have certification. Some of you don't that have now joined us. But certainly those of you that have the certification probably thinking, yeah, he's going to get that service rate from me. And then, of course, there's the financial planning that you think of when he talks about owning a home. So in terms of your next step with Steve, I'm going to help you with this. What do we do with anybody that comes through? We follow the assessment process. That might lead somebody to ticket, or that might lead somebody to VR, and maybe later to ticket, right? So this part so far should be very clear to you and very much familiar to you, okay? Let's talk about some decisions we have to make now. And do feel free to unmute yourself here if you want to speak up. I prefer that, actually. Because in a recording situation, the chat doesn't really get recorded. So does Steve have a ticket that's assignable? Well, yeah, sure. He might have a ticket that's assignable. I gave some clues earlier. Do you know what those clues are that make us be able to say, yes, he has a ticket that's assignable? That's an answer I'd like to just clarify. Okay, so go ahead.
It's Rachel. He's getting benefits. He's 42.
Correct.
And he's not working with VR or another EN.
Perfect. Those are the ingredients. You got them all. That's right. Based on what I gave you, you know that he has a ticket that's assignable, okay? The next question, though, really gets to the heart of the matter. Is Steve appropriate for the ticket program? All right, I'm going to help you with this one. I'm not going to address this with you. He might be. We probably have to further assess his needs, right? I've given you very basic information so far. So probably you have a lot of other questions about whether he is appropriate or not. So what should you consider as an Aiden member in terms of services that Steve needs? What should you be considering now? Okay, so I've got a comment here from Michelle. She would ask Steve if he needs intensive supports, including attending interviews or job training. If not, I would explain the support provided via ticket. That's sort of less hand-holding and more of a support to provide resources. Absolutely. Good thoughts. Excellent. What else do you need to know about Steve to kind of figure this out? Coaching supports on site.
I think it would also matter if this was a distance case or a local case.
Agreed. Tell me a little bit more about that, Rachel. I don't think you're on the wrong path there. Tell me more.
So typically, if I'm doing an assessment for a distance case, I need to see how well that person can follow up independently on things, and also how comfortable they are to utilize their community resources. Because it's really tough to make a resume with someone over the phone if they don't have a foundation, or it's difficult to do interview practice on the phone. So how comfortable are they to go out and use their one-stop?
Excellent points. Love it. Michelle added another point here in chat because she's shy and she won't speak to us today. Does he want to become financially self-sufficient? Yes. Michelle's going to the heart of some of the items we look at in the assessment process, right? I'm going to help you with a little bit more here. I want to think about these things that you see now. One of the things that I'm always thinking about, especially in this case, right? We've got a guy who, wants to work, but we got to figure out: are you looking to work immediately? If so, then maybe we assign the ticket. Okay. If he wants more education, which I was kind of leading into there, he's got background in it. I gave you information that was leading about the Steve not knowing if he'd be able to make enough, or to be able to replace benefits without a degree, a further degree, right? So we need to decide that. Does he want to pursue education? If so, then what? Then we have to decide whether to refer to VR or still assign the ticket. Because it could be possible that Steve could get financial assistance. Now, TAP might be a more specific term. I meant to remove that. So Pell, we all are familiar with. That's a federal grant, right, to help people with costs while they're going to school. TAP is more of a New York specific term, but more generally what I mean is if there's other state incentives for financial or for tuition assistance, okay? So those are some questions that would be in my mind. I see from Nan, we got a comment, could use a course to update computer skills, which would assess his ability to maintain activity, use a computer, and WIOA could pay for that. Very good. So that's one way. Nan is thinking, okay, well, if he just needs to get some computer upgrades, we could handle that right in the center. And I agree with you, Nan, wholeheartedly on that. The other question I think in the mix of all of this as we're helping him sort this out is we have to figure out, you're available immediately, members, right? If you get a referral, you can start working with this person. You could assign his ticket within a few days even, and say by next week you could be moving forward with the job search with somebody, right? So I would want to know, can VR serve him immediately? Does anyone have thoughts on what I mean by that? Can VR serve him immediately? Order of selection is what I was looking for, Michelle. Yes. So if you're in a state where VR is in an order of selection, that might mean there's a waiting list. And that waiting list could be long, frankly. And or it could be, when they talk about order of selection, what they're going to continue to do is serve those with the most significant disabilities first. Generally, that's how that's going to play out. So, I think that's a thought. If you're in a state that has that situation, I think that needs to be known. These are pieces I think that you're thinking about, but you need to play out with Steve too. Also, the thought comes to mind, at least as I was developing this, is that what can VR offer that Aiden does not in this scenario so far? And then I'm getting a comment here from Nikki saying how long it takes, almost a year sometimes. Almost a year from start to finish before we see the referral. So I think what the point is there from this comment is that it can take a long time to get open with VR, and that is true. That is true. But I want somebody else to address this question. What can VR offer based on what you've learned so far in this case study? What can VR offer that Aiden does not? Any thoughts on that, folks? Don't make me get up my cricket button. Help paying for education. Okay, all right. And Rachel, I want to press you a little further on that. Okay. If he gets Pell, if he goes to VR, would VR still require him to apply for any and all aid in the state that he's in? Yes, they would. Yes, they would. So regardless, he's going to have to apply for that, right? So, Rachel, are you saying above and beyond that, if there's costs, they might be able to support that, or you know, if you want to clarify, go ahead. Barb says job coaching potentially. Yep. In this case, based on what we laid out, and I know you jumped in a little after that slide, but based on what we're seeing from Steve, he's probably not a guy that's probably going to need a job coach. But you're right. I mean, you are right that they can cover that. In Steve's case, would he need that? Probably not. He seems pretty capable. Don't worry about it, Barbara. All right, so there you go. Now, really, the question is that bottom question, I think, right? Vouchers. There we go. Vouchers for books and supplies, as well as tutoring services, if necessary. Nikki says, yeah. In some cases, they can offer some of those things. So there are some distinctions here. I think it's on the highest level, it seems pretty obvious. But then, like always, as we boil things down, it starts to change the story. But here's what we decided. What we decided is we need more information from Steve, because we're on the journey of helping to sort this out with Steve, but we don't yet have enough information, I think, to make a good call here. So I'm going to give you some more information. I'm going to let you go ahead and review this slide, and I'll read it just in case. I assume everybody's on the platform. I don't know how we do this if you're not, but and welcome, Mar. I see we have a number of other folks that joined. That's fantastic. I'm just going to read this to make it easier for all of us. So Steve had a bout with cancer, which is now in remission. He worked at a home improvement company for about 15 years, his longest employer. He had other employers. That was his longest employer, where he worked his way up that ladder to management. He had to leave that job due to his deteriorating condition and ongoing treatments, and that was his last job. He did work for 5 months at a retail business, he tells you, more recently, and was laid off due to lack of work. He was earning $900 a month at this job. After some initial career counseling with Steve, he decides that now would be a good opportunity for him to return to school to complete his business management degree. Remember earlier in the case study I told you he had some college credits, actually quite a few college credits towards his business degree. Because his wife is not working, he is sure he would be eligible for the federal aid and state tuition assistance if applicable. Not every state offers that, so that's going to be a variable. Here in New York, we do have a healthy tuition assistance program. Some states don't have anything at all. Some states do. You also discover that Steve has more than a few college credits. He has a full year of credits towards his AS in business management. So I'm going to give you just a minute to jot down any details you think are important based on that slide. And there are some things you should be jotting down. That's my hint. And if you joined us later, don't worry. Mary Lynn is keeping track of our attendance today, and we'll capture those that joined after we took roll call. Okay, let's take a look at what we want to look at next. We have another decision to make, okay? So we have two options here, folks. This is pretty straightforward. We have two options, unless, there might be a third option. But I think the two basic options we want to review today are whether to refer Steve to VR or to assign his ticket to Aiden. And it wouldn't be fair to kind of ask you some of these things. So some of this is just me giving you insights here, such as this. If there is a referral to VR, what should we do? Well, we should inform Steve to come back to Aiden after VR services, right? And remember, if he goes to VR first, the phase 1 payments won't be available. Remember, if anybody, that's with the assumption that Steve is closed successfully from VR, which he seems like the kind of guy that will be. So that's how that works. CDR protections would still apply, if he was open with VR, okay? So these are things I think that are kind of important for him to know. If we assign the ticket to Aiden, if Steve can get the financial aid and he can pay for the transportation costs and books, he could certainly assign his ticket to Aiden. Aiden would be able to collect all the payments in that situation because, the phase 1 milestones would be available. I don't think that really, at this stage, is the most important and compelling piece of information. I think what's important is that Steve knows his options, and that's what we're laying out here for him. So assuming Steve made the decision to work with Aiden versus the VR system, vocational rehabilitation system, the assignment of the ticket would not need to wait because he would need the services Aiden can offer prior to college graduation, right? We're not just leave him hanging. I mean, if I really think he should be in one of these systems now, whether it's us or VR, as well as the medical CDR protections that ticket can offer. Certainly VR can too. I made that point earlier. So that's the situation, okay? And now what I have to do, because this is a case study, is kind of help you with the decision that Steve makes at this point. And he does choose Aiden. And that might seem odd, and it might seem like it would just be obvious that he would go to VR to a lot of folks on the line here. But even when people have the options and know that there might be some out-of-pocket costs, this would not be an unrealistic example. In fact, I've had many examples like Steve that I've worked with over the years. And this is true in his case because he is going to be eligible for aid, right, through the Pell and depending on the state he's in, the tuition assistance. Very good. Nikki made a call there, a predictive call, and got it right, Nikki. Good job. Okay. Now, in terms of benefits and work incentive advisement services, what's the first step? Now, this is where I do need some input. What's the first step if you're an Aiden member that's not certified? And I really would like to hear your voice. Go ahead and just tell me what you think here. This is pretty straightforward.
You'd need to get the SSA 3288 signed.
True. Wouldn't matter if you're certified or not, would it? I mean, that'd be a good first step.
Nope, it'd be same first step.
Same first step. What's a distinction, as long as I have you, Rachel, and you're brave, as you are, what's the first step after the 3288 if you're a member who is not certified to provide this information to him?
You're going to need to refer them to someone who is certified.
Refer to
and make that connection with that person.
You got it. And of course, if Aiden member is certified and you have the 3288, what's the next step, Rachel? What would you need to get?
Get their BPQI and their
100%.
non-certified yearly total earnings.
Very good. Okay, so you're starting to see the path here, right? Okay, so Steve, and by the way, before we go any further, is that a brave move? Is that a move that you would have expected Steve to make? Or do you think that he just should have gone to VR? What do you think, folks? I'm curious of your opinion of what Steve decided to do. I helped him make
Michelle.
that decision. Go ahead.
Oh, I think a lot of people prefer Aiden and Ticket to Work because it is so quick. I mean, I've had people call and then set up an intake the next day. And so the process is so quick. And so I think if he doesn't need the supports provided through VR, there's really no reason not to sign up with Aiden.
Okay. I like that answer. I mean, so Michelle, what you're saying is, we can really act we're a little more nimble than a larger, say, state agency can be with folks, right? And
right.
we can kind of meet them where they're at a lot more quickly. And, I'm not going to fault VR. I mean, when you have an agency that big, there has to be processes in place, okay? But we are able to act a lot more quickly with folks. And frankly, if in this case, Steve's financial circumstances allowed for him to be able to cover things like, the gas it takes to get to school, because there might be some reimbursement through VR, that would be a difference. Then you're right. He might want to just move more quickly. And that's actually something I've heard from people, Michelle, that have made that decision, is that I wanted to work with you because we could start really quickly. We could get this going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I agree completely. I think that's probably why a lot of people make that decision. But here's some more information I need you to know about Steve. Okay, he does end up going to his community college, and he completes his AS in business management. He's a real quick study. He got through this schooling in about 5 minutes of this case study, so he's doing great. But now you're ready to take next steps with him and helping him to achieve his goal of working as a manager in retail, because that's his goal. You do access the BPQI, okay, because you're a member that has certification. And you review any earnings David has had since he started receiving disability. This is going to provide you a baseline for work incentive guidance and helping to determine if his SSA record is current. That is something, by the way, you should be doing when you're looking at that BPQI, is always encouraging people to look at his or her recent earnings, okay, and make sure it looks right. We used to have a way to do that through the updated, sort of letters that SSA would send us that tell us about what to expect if we became retired or what we'd expect to get in retirement benefits someday. I'm sorry, if we became disabled or when we retire. How do people get to that information today? We don't get those letters anymore, do we? There is a way that you can find that out. Each of you on the line should have this My SSA account. Very good, Rachel. That's exactly right. That took the place of those letters that came out. And the reason I'm bringing this up, folks, why am I bringing this up? Because, normally people would be looking at those each year when they came to them and kind of looking at their wages, their earnings for the last year. Yeah, that looks right. Okay, and they file it away. We don't get those letters anymore. So, people really should have a myssa.gov account, okay, including our participants. You all should have one too and be keeping track of that. But the other way we can look at this is on the BPQI, because we're going to see about, I think it gives us about the last 10 years of recent work. So double check that. So you got the BPQI now, and that gives you the baseline, okay? And I'm going to give you some relevant information, and I'm going to leave it on this slide just for a little bit so that you can jot down anything you think is important that we collected from the BPQI. Now, what I've done here on this slide is not giving you everything you would find in the BPQI. I've given you the information that you'll need to make decisions about this case study. And again, there might be a better way to do this in the future for folks. I've thought about some options, but we wanted to try it this way first. So now kind of jot down the things you think are important in the case of Steve, because you're going to need this information, or at least some of it, to make good decisions later, such as date of disability onset, 6/3/2011, his date of entitlement, 12/2011. Who can tell me the difference between those two before we proceed? We've got a date of disability onset. We've got a date of entitlement. There's a gap there. There's a gap between those two dates. Who knows why? Rachel knows why. She got her hand up. Thank you, Rachel. Go ahead and tell me.
The date of disability onset is when you stopped working or had to make changes to your work activity. And the date of entitlement is when the payment started to come, because there's that 5-month waiting period.
Perfect. You got it. That's that 5-month waiting period. See, so it would be the first full month after the date of onset. So that'd be, really starting his 5-month waiting period in July, right? July, August, September, October, November, making December the first payment month. Very good. Okay, great. I like that hand raise feature. I forgot that. We can do that. And that's in the participant window. If you haven't pulled it up, you just click at the bottom of your screen, participant. It'll bring up the window with everybody in it. Okay, others paid on this record. It says yes. His full amount of disability benefits is $11.27. Total cash benefits for the family is $17.88. Says there's no overpayment balance. The next medical review coming up this year in June. And he's got a 3-year cycle. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Trial work period months used, it says 0. Okay. Does anybody see anything suspect in the BPQI based on what you've learned about Steve so far?
Hey, Kevin, it's Michelle.
Hey, Michelle.
Hey. Well, if he was making he worked for 5 months in 2016 and made $900 a month. That's over the trial work period for 2016. So it really should say that he's used 5 trial work months. That's sort of the first thing that popped up in my head. I'd also be curious to know who in his family is getting paid off of his disability check and how much they're receiving.
Okay. But Michelle, we got this report from the Social Security Administration. Are you telling me it's not right?
I am telling you it's not right.
Wow, that just blows my mind. Michelle, that's very insightful. We're going to come back to that, but that's a great thought. I think you should all be listening to, frankly, and probably were thinking that too. If you weren't, well, maybe you should. But we do have to kind of scrutinize these reports carefully and balance it with what we've learned about the people we're serving, right? So there's reality that we're learning from our customers, and then there's what we get from SSA. If there's a conflict in the two, well, we need to look closer at that. So let's look at some next steps that focus on benefits. Now, Michelle, I'm going to help you a little bit. This is for all of you. Michelle started to ask some things that kind of lead into what I think you should ask about Steve and his benefits. Any thoughts on that? What other questions do you need to know and ask Steve about regarding his benefits? Now, remember, this isn't WIPA referral. This is you now with your benefits work incentive advisor cap on, and you're giving this advice to him. So what else do you need to know about him? I'm going to give Michelle credit. She asked something about somebody else being paid on the record. So, right, has he claimed all of his wages? Michelle also mentioned, does he have children, right? Now we did, yep, if he has any dependents, right? Now, and this is so cool how this works, right? Because I actually gave you the answer to this earlier, but it's tough. It's easy to see things and then sort of not have information click into place, right? Because I told you earlier, he had 2 children, ages 12 and 15. Okay. If he has Medicaid, Medicare, Part B, okay. So good thoughts, Rachel. So here's some other thoughts for you. We need to know a few things about David's dependents. In this case, he has 2 children that was mentioned earlier. He's gone to school for a year at this point, and now his kids are 13 and 16. But the other thing as an advisor that you're doing, right, is not just looking at disability. You're looking at all the other benefits in the family. Are there any other public benefits? Is there SNAP benefits involved? That's a Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as food stamps in years past. Is QMB involved? Who knows what QMB is? Put that in the chat. Is there HEAP involved? Is what's going on with health insurance? Rachel pointed that out. What about his health insurance? What's he paying for there? These are the pieces of the puzzle, we kind of have to sift through because he's going to want answers. Qualified Medicare beneficiaries, exactly. That's what that can do is help pay for Part B expenses, right, depending on income through departments of social services. So all these things can be impacted by work. I wish life, I always used to think this way, that I wish life wasn't so complicated and that we could just put things in a bubble and just focus on benefits because that's complicated enough. But unfortunately, it isn't that easy. We have to look at all these things. So how does Steve's work impact dependents benefits? And this is more of a general question. I want you to tell me what you know and actually speak up. Feel free to unmute any of our certified folks. Remember, when you're giving these answers, you're helping others. And don't make me pick on you because I know who knows these answers. But generally, just more globally, how does Steve's work impact the dependents benefits? Is that a tougher one for you guys? I know Edella would know. And I know somebody that just unmuted would know. Is that Nan?
Yeah, well, it makes a difference in what his total family benefits are and what other benefits they're eligible for.
But what do you think, Nan, as long as I have you, so if Steve starts working, what happens to dependents benefits?
You mean his dependent benefits under Social Security?
Yeah. So he's got. So first of all, let's clarify. Dependents benefits are paid to minors based on having a parent that has insured status who's, on benefits. In this case, it'd be Steve. He's got the insured status. He's got the disability benefit, but he's got 2 children. We know that. Because he has 2 children, and because of the information you saw in the BPQI, you can surmise that his children are receiving dependents benefits,
Yes.
right? And that's based on his work history. Okay, so Nikki has a thought here too, and Nan, you can stay with me.
Okay.
But Nikki's saying that they will continue to collect until 18 years of age. That is true. Or out of high school, full-time, Rachel. That was the other part of the equation. So between you 2 ladies there, you got it right. Okay, so what's going to happen, and Nan, you tell me if this makes sense. I'm going to give you a little tip here now. So the youngest dependent will continue to receive benefits until age 18 or until graduation from high school. Therefore, this should be taken into account when looking at replacement value of the total benefits Steve and his family receive, don't you think?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm trying to bring you guys is that,
Okay.
his benefit is X dollars. We know that. I showed you that. But he's also getting dependents benefits. Now, the tougher question, Nan, I'm gonna pick on you first. Oh, and one more point before we get there. Remember that if Steve's benefits cease, so do dependents benefits. Did you all know that? So if Steve stops getting benefit check, so do the dependents.
Right.
Okay. I wish it wasn't that way. We've actually talked about that with SSA when we've been able to give public comment at times, but that is today the way things work. So, Nan, this is a tougher question. Do you remember what was in the BPQI in terms of the total family cash benefit?
I wrote it down. Well, I didn't write it down. 1,700 and
1788.
yeah,
Okay. And do you know what Steve gets?
it was 11.
27.
1127. Yeah, there it is.
Okay. So there's a discrepancy there, isn't there?
Yes.
Okay. So what we can kind of surmise, I'm going to help you with this one too, is that if the report tells us the total family cash benefits are 1788, and we know what his benefit is, we can kind of figure out that other benefits are being paid, right? In this case, probably dependents benefits. Okay. I didn't mention anything about a disabled child or anything, so we'd be talking about dependents benefits here. So that's how we would figure that out. So in this case, he's got another $661 in dependents benefits between the 2. Okay?
Okay.
So I do have another question. Can his wife receive benefits as his dependent? His wife can receive a benefit if she's caring for a minor who has a disability. In this case, I think I've tried to keep it cleaner, and it would just be Steve getting benefits and his actual children, his dependents. But that is a good point, Michelle. That is possible in some cases. Okay? How are we doing so far, folks? Does this sort of make sense?
Yes.
We're doing okay? So Steve has got benefits, his kids got benefits, but I have tougher questions about these incentives, and I won't hold you on the hook here much longer, Nan, and you can kind of just decide whether to answer now or not. But these are a few more questions that I'd like you to look at with me about benefits and the details of his benefits. What work incentives has Steve used that you know based on the information I gave you, if any?
Trial work period.
How many?
5.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Because he had earnings of $900, which is more than the trial work period amount, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I didn't give you this figure, but the trial work period amount for 2016 was $810. Okay? Rachel. Ding, ding, ding. Rachel gets the prize. Okay. that was exactly right. So based on what, and so far it's pretty straightforward. Steve has used 5 of those months. Pretty clear. Didn't show up on the report. How come?
Did he
I
report?
didn't. Go ahead.
I just asked, I wonder if he reported it.
That's one question we should be asking, Nan. Did he report his wages? Okay.
I also
Adela is
didn't
agreeing.
see on the BPQY when his last work activity review was.
Aha. You did not.
Because sometimes Social Security is very delayed, so it might be that he reported, but it's not been entered into his file, and so it's behind. Because I've had that happen before with participants where Social Security is just not up to date.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. I didn't know that.
Yep. No, that was a nuance I was hoping you would catch. So we don't know when the last time it was that Social Security updated his record, do we? And I'm giving you both of the answers here. It's possible he wasn't reporting his wages, option 1. Alternatively, to Rachel's point, he may have been reporting wages, but SSA did not record these wages to record yet. This should be corrected with SSA by providing wage data for that period of work. Now, how do they collect that information? There is a specific form that people will get when they find out that you're working, that they will ask you to complete. Does anybody know what that form is? Nikki says, this just happened with my current case she's working on. A work activity report, yes. And Mary Lynn has that in there. Rachel has that in there. Absolutely correct. As soon as you say to Social Security, I'm working, there's a reason we want the people to report wages and new work activity. We don't really want that record to go unchecked for years, okay? That's problematic. It's better that they know what's going on. It's better that they're keeping these records up to date. And I always used to tell people, and you should, when we report this work activity, don't be concerned if Social Security sends you a report to fill out that they call a work activity report. All that is Social Security collected information about your recent wages, or, it can not only be recent, but it can go back quite a ways. And I bet there's folks on the line here today. Has anybody seen a work activity report come through and the date that they want you to complete the information for goes back years, many years? Has anybody ever dealt with that? No?
No, thank goodness.
Idella has, I figured. Yep. Nikki had one that goes back 3 years. Michelle says not yet going back years. I've had some go back 8 years. And that just tells us the state of the situation in Social Security, okay? Now, when you get these letters, here's a little tip for each of you, our certified gurus, that you need to know for the folks you're serving. When they get that report, there will always be an accompanying letter that comes with it that asks you to fill out that report from X date forward, okay? Idella just said she has one that goes back 10 years and another one with an overpayment of 100K. Now, that is a record, Idella. I think my largest overpayment I've helped with and erased was about 35K. That's just ridiculous. That shouldn't happen, frankly, folks, okay? That shouldn't happen. I feel bad when that happens because it is sad. Adela says that's very sad. It is, because they should be, if they're on the job, they should be reporting these wages, right? And I'm going to try my hardest not to throw SSA under the bus, but when people are reporting, they really should be reporting these wages in the system. But when you get these work activity reports, I want you looking at an important date that will be attached with that first page of that report. It's going to tell you, complete report from this date forward. Follow those instructions. Give him, my rule of thumb has always been with Social Security, give them what they ask for, not what they don't. Give them what they ask for. So whatever the date is, moving forward, that's what I'm going to complete and fill in. And that's what you should do. Okay, next question. What SSA work incentive, if any, might be appropriate in supporting Steve while he's attending college? Someone knows this. I know one of you knows it. Will know this. Might be appropriate. Okay. Any thoughts on that? Past plan. There it is. All right. Okay, we got it. Okay, you got it right. Okay. Potentially, we don't know because, as always, you need more information. Is Steve a good candidate for pass? And we don't know completely, but what questions would you want to ask to sort that out? Let's think about Steve. Steve's getting, I'm going to come back to this, I'm going to help you. Steve's getting disability, right? And how much is he getting? He's getting $1,127 a month, okay? Rachel's already got the form up. Okay, so what questions do you need to sort out though? So let's say we're trying to make Steve eligible for pass. How do you figure out if it's going to be a good fit? That's what I'm really asking you. How do you know what to ask next? How do you know how to sort out whether pass is going to be a good fit or not? Now there's, think about policy when I'm talking about these things with you, okay? What are the things you need to know? When we make somebody eligible for pass that receives disability, what are we really making them eligible for?
For SSI.
Thank you. For
Also, we need
SSI.
to look at resources as well.
Thank you. There you go. So if we're making somebody eligible for SSI who gets disability, remember, people on disability could have long work histories, and guess what else they could have? Resources, frankly, they should have, right? If they haven't diminished them while they're waiting for a decision from Social Security to figure out if they're eligible. But people should have, retirement accounts. People might have money banked and other resources and assets. So number one, you got to figure out the assets, okay? Because how much can you have in assets and still be eligible for SSI in Steve's situation?
Yeah.
$2,000.
Not much.
$2,000. That's not a lot of money.
Uh-uh.
Not a lot of money. So Steve might have more money than that. What else do you need to do? What else do you need to figure out? You're right about that, Rachel. That was excellent. But there's other things you need to sort out. Does PASS work for everybody?
Of course not.
Doesn't work for everybody. Doesn't work for everybody. Let me help you out with this. Okay, so Rachel gave me this answer. You have to know information about assets. If he's got more than the asset limit, you're just chasing your tail here. It's not going to do any good to try to run this down to see if it's going to work. But also, what is it about PASS that you have to figure out? You have to look at the math, don't you? And the need, right? Let me just walk you through this. You need to run through numbers to evaluate how much he'd need to set aside to become eligible for SSI, wouldn't you? Right? We have to look at the formula. Always go back to the formula. Remember that PASS deductions do come after the 2-for-1 rule, and that does make this a very powerful incentive, but it's not necessarily an incentive that's right in every situation. So you really would, in order to take the next step, and I'm going to help you with a formula here. This is the only way I can see to show you. You need to look at the total amount that the person would set aside in PASS, in this case, Steve, to see if developing the incentive would make sense. So we need to know what is the expense first, don't we? Right, and Adele is saying, well, you got to know if the person has earnings to put aside to meet the employment goal, right? And in this case, that's absolutely true. We'd have to figure that out too. In this case, though, Adela, he does have disability, and we could set aside some of his disability to help with this, so that would work. We do have to have a goal of SGA level employment, right? Which he does. But let me just help you with this. I think when you see these numbers, this is going to help you understand why this may or may not be right. We know that Steve gets $11.27 in disability. So what am I doing here? I'm doing the basic math to show you what you'd be eligible for in SSI if we use PASS in this scenario. This is what I often used to do with folks. It's sort of like sketching out SSI calculations. Thank you, Michelle. Yes. So it's kind of like, if you're a carpenter and you're starting to develop or build something, you're going to do a rough sketch, right? You're going to do a rough sketch to see this is what I'm going to build, and then you're going to refine that and put that into some kind of a blueprint. Well, that's what we're doing here, is the rough sketch, and this is something you could do with a customer if you think they might This might fit or it might not, and you can help them understand how this works a little better. In Steve's case, we have his benefit minus the general exclusion. This is going back to your SSI rules, $20. Remainder's $11.07, and in this case, I'm only looking at it while he was in school, so he wasn't working yet. When he was in school, but he did have disability benefits, okay, that could have been put toward it. He would have had to put in $500. This is just an example in pass, just to get some level of benefit. The remainder would be $607. When we subtract that from his federal benefit rate, in his situation, the federal benefit rate would be $735. Why would it be that rate? Does anybody know? It's another trick question for you. Why would it be $735? That's the federal benefit rate. Now I'm switching over to SSI rules, aren't I? This happens all the time, especially if we're going to employ pass for somebody on disability. Wife wasn't earning, no spousal deeming, right? Correct? Nobody else is right? So actually what I'm fishing for here is that he would really be considered single living with others. Okay? So he's paying his fair share of the household expenses, right? But that's how Social Security would look at Steve in this situation, even though he's in a family situation. I know that sounds weird. He is married. He's not single, but in the SSI world, he would be considered single living with others, okay, because he does have children and a wife, and that's where the with others comes in, because I assume they're preparing and buying meals together, which, by the way, can affect the state rate that Steve would receive. In this case, I'm more concerned about the federal rate only to show you this example. What happens is we subtract that 607 from the 735 we figured out would be his federal rate if he was eligible, and look at the SSI amount. It'd be $114. So here's my conclusion, and I want to see if you agree with this. In Steve's situation, pass might not be the greatest solution to pay for books and transportation costs, unless the expenses were fairly large over the year that he attended school, right? Because, I mean, even in my example I've given you here, I'm saying he's got to set aside $500 a month, and that's a lot, and I don't know if it would be that big an expense or not. I doubt it. Additionally, he'd need to set aside a large amount of his disability check, as I showed you here, to cover pass. Therefore, probably not the most effective use of pass in this situation. So we can kind of almost make anybody eligible for this, I mean, if we wanted to, but is it practical? Okay, I want you to think in those terms. Is it practical? Does he have expenses that are high enough to make this worthwhile? Does that make sense to folks? But this should be a thought process. And in my mind, if I was looking at Steve, this was a thought process, and it was something I checked off my list, okay? I was thinking about it. I thought about pass. I kind of ran some numbers, and I knew kind of some of his expenses, and I said, no, probably not going to work for Steve. He'd have to set aside way too much. And if that doesn't make sense, well, it's a little trickier, because now we're using some crossover rules, right? We're using some things that you have to understand from SSI world and applying it now to Steve's situation. So that would probably be how that'd play out, and probably the decision you would make as a member if we were to look at it for his college expenses. So with that in mind, what other services might help Steve pay for transportation expenses while he's attending college? I'm gonna rule out the Pell and the tuition assistance, because we know those. We already brought that up, and there's no way we would not be able to help him apply for that. That's what he's going to need to make this happen. But what other avenues could we pursue to help pay for transportation expenses while he's attending school, and maybe some other minor expenses that he incurs? IRWIs might be used. Maybe, it depends. In Steve's situation, he has a car. It's licensed. It's not a car with modifications. So in terms of transportation, you know, how would anybody else get to school? They'd probably drive or take the bus, right? So that the transportation vehicle itself, the mechanism that he uses, probably wouldn't do. He might have some other expenses that he's paying for out of pocket. But would IRWI help in the situation of Steve? Would IRWI help, because when Steve was going to school, he wasn't working, was he? Right? So let's think that through together. And these are good. This is how we learn together. Okay? So if If Steve was going to school and he's on disability and he's not working yet, can we use IRWI? Would we want to? Don't be shy. Mar says no. Tell me more, Mar. You're on the right path. Not if he's not employed, Mary Lynn says. He's not working, Mar says. There you go. So the point is that Mar and Mary Lynn make is that, and Adela says, that's right, you guys got it right. So Adela gave you a gold star. The point is, if you're on disability, you use IRWI to lower countable income, Michelle. Yes, that's what IRWI is for when somebody's on disability. Very good. If you're on SSI, that's a different story. Now we can use IRWI to help recoup some of your costs. You know how I say some of your costs? Because of where IRWI comes into the calculation. You could never recoup more than 1/2 the cost of your expenses through IRWI for SSI, okay? So because there's no income, Michelle's saying also in chat, it's not going to be helpful in this case. Absolutely right. You're right. But we needed to think that through. So I'm glad you put that out there, Adela, okay? We need to think these things through critically, and it's fun to do that with your colleagues as others bring up these things. So what else? So we shot that down, but it was an idea, and that's what I'm looking for is ideas right now. That's how this works. What else could help pay for these transportation expenses that Steve is incurring? There might be some other ways. We got to think a little creatively. I'm going to give you an idea, okay? Mar says an ABLE account? Potentially. Now, let me just pause you there before we go further with Mar's suggestion of an ABLE account. In this case, does Steve really need an ABLE account? We'll get to your thought, Rachel, but I want to stick with Mar. He wouldn't be eligible because of age of onset. Rachel, I didn't make a specific note that he was young when this happened, so I'm going to agree with your comment. But there's another important thing that bypasses all of this when we talk about Steve and ABLE account. Why do we have ABLE accounts, folks? Why not just a savings account? To keep them as exempted resources. Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to come back to Mar's thought of ABLE account. We know now that an ABLE account helps to, protect funds so they don't count as a resource. Doesn't count towards income, Mar says. No, that's not true. It doesn't count as a resource. Okay? All right, doesn't count as a resource. So what does an ABLE account do? It protects funds from the resource limits that certain programs have. If somebody's on disability, do they care about resource limits? No, they don't. Because there is no resource limit for somebody that received disability, okay? Again, thank you, Mar, because it just, trust me, other people were thinking this. They just didn't say it, so thank you. Okay, so ABLE account, we're going to scratch that off. That's probably not going to help him, nor does he need to do that. He could have a bank account for that matter, because it doesn't matter. I don't care if he's got $1 million in the bank. He could still be collecting his disability benefits. Now, IDA was mentioned, individual development accounts. We got some bad news about them recently that I think they're going to not be funded in the future, or at least in the near future. Let's just say they were not in the next federal budget, which is not good. So while there will be some IDAs around for a while, I think they're going to become scarce in the near future, okay? But yes is the answer, actually, for education. You can use IDAs, okay? So fantastic. Would he be able to maybe get that going in time to actually use for these? Potentially. He's been in school for a year, so it might take him a few months to save a little bit because those are matched dollars. So I'm going to say that's a maybe. That's a definite maybe. Rachel, I think you brought that up, or maybe Edela. I think both of you did. Very good. I'm gonna get a little more basic, a little more grounded, a little more down to earth from where I've come from in my background. But what about the AJC? Right? Okay, Rachel, I'm going to get to your point. I like what you're talking about there, but let's talk about the AJC, right? Did you know that they do have funding to help pay for some of these things, okay? they call it supportive service funding, and if you went in and told them that, their jaw would drop because they wouldn't expect you to know that. And it doesn't mean that just because I know that that's possible that it's available, okay? Because here's the thing with AJCs, and when they do have a line item for certain things, and they have a certain budget, and when that budget's gone for certain training and or support needs like this offers, it's gone until the next funding cycle. So I'm not guaranteeing this would work, but I'm telling you that it's something I would look at potentially. And I know from my own experience, I know Mary Lynn has experience with maybe her state or others that people have used this. You can get certain reimbursement for maybe some expenses, maybe some books. Okay, there is some it's a sort of it's based on some discretion they have at the local level, and just know that the availability of funding does vary greatly from state to state. So don't go away thinking I said that's a guarantee. It's not a guarantee, but I would look at that as a possibility. And the person you'd want to speak to there at the center would be the WIOA case manager for approval. They're the people that would to make that happen. Okay. Here's another interesting thought. Can he carpool with another student maybe that lives by? I don't expect you to pull that out of your hat, but I like the thought. I like that thought because it's possible that could shave off some costs. What about this? Any local program that provides small amounts of funds for such expenses? Wow, Rachel, does that sound familiar? Does the college have any information to explore? Now, interestingly, Rachel put something in the chat that says could look for funding through another program like we have the Innovation Fund in Tompkins County here in New York. In our community, there's a coalition of service providers that work closely together to develop opportunity. I like to look at it that way for people with disabilities in our community to advance them financially. And they do have this fund they call an innovation fund, very similar to what Aiden is going to have someday. Why? Because, well, you know, we might have had some influence there on that initially when that started. But we love this idea, and it has been used effectively. You might not have that in your community, but you might have things going on in your community you don't know about. That's the point with this question, okay? And frankly, you should talk to the college to see if there's any other resources available. There's might be different things in different communities. Since we have members across the country, it's hard to tell exactly what's going on in every area. Good thoughts. But I didn't hear, and I'm not surprised, you know, that the AJC wasn't the first thing you thought to go to. I'm not surprised, you know. Mary Lynn and I have spent a lot of our years in that world, and so we think about that a lot. Oh, here's another comment. VR may be able to pay for education too. Right, that's true, Edella. But Steve made the decision to come to Aiden, and a ticket can only have one home, which is why we got to think creatively now, because Steve came to us. So now it's our job to kind of piece this together. Now, we did tell Steve at the beginning of this case study, we told him what his options were. He chose Aiden. We were not influencing him one way or the other. We told him, here's what VR can do, you know, blah, 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 and here's what, you know, okay, so there you go. But Mary Lynn made another good point here. Steve is connected, if he is connected with a church, he could explore support from them for a one-time expense. Thank you very much, Mary Lynn. Nobody ever talks about faith-based community, but I've had a lot of great outreach to the faith-based, to our churches in our area, various denominations, didn't matter. Got a lot of traction from some of that outreach. I agree completely with that, and I think that is an option. Mar says we have a disability coordinator in our colleges who can assist with finding resources for student needs. Isn't that amazing? Check that out. So look at all the resources we have at our fingertips. What we're doing is very useful to Steve, though, because he doesn't know about any of these things. And you know what he wants? He wants results, like most of us do. So the fact that he chose us, and we've got all these great folks here that have all these great ideas for how to find resources, tells me I think Steve made the right decision. So let's look at let's look at the next piece here. Is this financially viable? I always have to come back to this, because remember, that's what we're trying to achieve with people. So based on the facts that you've been provided, roughly how much would Steve need to earn each month to make losing his disability benefits financially viable for his family? All right, and I'm going to give you a minute to think about this, all right? I want you to think about the information that you were given, that hopefully you jotted down. I'm going to give you some tips. His benefit is $11.27. Okay, anything else you need to know? We covered? let me know. If you need a specific number you don't have in front of you to sort this out, put it in the chat and I'll give it to you. I just want to know that you're thinking about the right numbers, okay? So what is it that he would need to make monthly to make this financially viable for his family? I like where you're going with that, Michelle. There's one number missing in your equation. At least say for the next 5 years. So run that number again, Michelle. Now, Michelle, for those that are listening to this archive, has in the chat 1127, which is Steve's benefit amount, plus 1170, which is not a random number, but the number that is associated with the SGA level for this year. And she comes with this total of 2297. Now, Michelle has added to her equation 661, which equates to the amount the dependents receive for a number of years, which really is, you're eating a cupcake? I was eating a mint. Okay, so thank you. That's great. Okay. All right. So Michelle gets the gold star for that answer. And I'll tell you why. I mean, well, I won't. Actually, I want to ask you why. But look at these numbers. We've got Steve's benefit, 1127, plus dependents, 661. And we've got SGA, 1170. So total benefits plus SGA in this case is 2958. So here's a note for you. This calculation only applies when his children are receiving dependents benefits, right? So my question to you is, does this logic make sense to you? Does this logic make sense to you? So if you're now looking at it from a job development perspective, you're looking at David's total benefit, you're looking at his dependents benefits, you're looking at SGA, you're adding it together, and you're saying this is about the amount that we need to see you earning to make it worthwhile to break even and get ahead. Does that logic make sense? Yes or no? Idella says yes. Idella, would you unmute and give me your logic as to why you agree with that?
Yes, I will agree with that because we also have to look at the health insurance. I know that he's going to have Medicare, but then he's going to have to pay for the Medicare premium, and also the family health insurance and the cost of living. So.
But Idella, why did I look at his benefit plus dependents plus SGA? Why do you think that makes sense?
That makes sense because if he's not getting the benefits, he will need to get more money to cover for his family. He's the family household.
That's right. That's right. So here's my basic logic, the way I've always looked at this, and I tell me if you agree or not. But I mean, if so, here's a guy that might need to go full time and make that $3,000, okay. But if he was only making about $2,000, that's still enough to, let's say he was working full time and he was making $2,000. That really wouldn't be worth it, would it? Because here's a guy who could work and make 11. So if he was making $2,000, he'd lose all of his benefits and his total income would be $2,000, right? Where he could just work part-time, stay under SGA. See, so we have to be realistic about this. There's another factor in this equation that changes though, and that's dependence benefits, right? Let's say if Steve came to you and his oldest dependent, or youngest, I'll say his youngest dependent was 17. I might take that 661 out of the equation because, why? Because the dependent is going to age out in a year. So you can't really look at, that's not a fair way to look at his budget. That's not the replacement cost. It might be for 1 year, but long term, that's not the way it's going to look for him and his family, because that dependent is going to graduate or age out, one of the two. So depending on the age of the dependents, and I think in this situation, his dependents are going to receive this benefit for 5 years. So I think it is fair to look at that as a part of the replacement value for the family, because there's still a number of years that they can expect to get that benefit. Do you understand? So that's what I think you're looking at as a job developer, as as a representative of Aiden, as somebody who's working with people on the ground, this is real life here, folks. Okay, this is what he knows he's getting. He's gonna stop getting that dependent benefit if he goes to work above SGA. So it's not fair not to look at this, I think, for his family. That's our job. Our job is to make people better off financially, not worse off because they go to work, okay? Now, there's some caveats to this, but I think that's the general idea I wanted to get across, is that this is how we have to kind of look at things, which then lead us down the path of how we job develop effectively for Steve. So here's a progress update. Here's more information that you're going to need. All right, and I'll read this again. Based on the meetings you have had with Steve, you now understand the following. After work incentive advisement, Steve is now ready to try working full-time. His initial decision to work part-time had more to do with his lack of understanding of benefits and his concern of not being able to replace the amount of benefits he receives through work activity. Now he understands that he has a period of time to evaluate his ability to work full-time. Based on his schooling schedule, Steve has discovered he is capable of a schedule that would mimic full-time work. Interesting. Steve is anxious to get back to work and earning as much as possible. He should also command more money now that he has his AS degree. Here's some more information you need to understand. You might want to jot down a couple things here. So at this point in the case study, either you have made a referral to WIPA or you've provided advisement to Steve directly regarding his disability benefits and work incentives. So now this is what Steve knows, that he can receive 9 of these trial work period months in order to try returning to work with no penalties, right? He now knows, because you've gotten involved, that he has used 5 of his 9 trial work period months because you were smart enough to see the discrepancy in the BPQI and know enough that these should have been counted because you're certified. Isn't it great? That leaves 4 trial work period months available for use. After he uses all of these trial work period months, he's now provided what? His extended period of eligibility, 36 more months, during which his insurance is maintained and benefits, insurance is maintained and benefits are maintained if his earnings are below the SGA limit. He is interested in getting back to work gainfully, he is more interested in getting back to work gainfully than he is in maintaining his disability benefits. Have you talked to people like that? Are you working with people that just say, I want to get off benefits?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yes. Isn't it great?
Yeah.
I don't believe what I hear on the news, folks. I mean, I hear all of this story about people wanting to, be on this benefit. People don't want to be on this benefit. They want to work. They want to get back to work if they can. Here's another update about Steve. He starts working, okay? And this is getting interesting now. With the assistance of Aiden, Steve is offered employment and begins working June 1st, 2018. Because he was going to school, okay? And let's see, he's offered a management position, which starts out at 20 hours a week at $16.50 an hour. He's told he'll eventually move to full-time hours after about 6 months. Also not unrealistic. During his first month of employment, Steve is told there's some heavy lifting that managers often assist with, such as unloading trucks. Steve confides in his supervisor that he has a back injury, and his supervisor removes Steve from unloading duties. His supervisor also allows him to call upon other store associates as needed if there are tasks that require him to lift beyond his capacity. Michelle, you're so tricky. I've talked to you too much on the side, haven't I, Michelle? It's great. Love it. So here's some more questions, benefits analysis questions, impact of a new job. And I mentioned that for folks that are listening to this now, recorded because of something I saw in the chat that I won't reveal just yet. So let's talk about these questions. I want you to estimate for me Steve's gross wages for this position. Let me go back and help you. You're going to need this slide. Tell me what you would estimate his gross wages to be. Let's start there. It's so much easier if I had you in a room. I could see you with your calculators, crunching numbers. Michelle's got a number up there. Okay. Ooh, Rachel's got a different number. I like that. There's two different numbers. I don't know which one's right. I don't know. Maybe I got the wrong number. We're going to find out in a minute. Let's just see. I'll put that up there. Gross wages, in my estimation, would be 20 hours. Idella and I agree. Therefore, I have to be right. No, I'm just kidding. But Idella used the same math I did, I'm sure. 20 hours times 1650, that's his hourly rate, times 4.33 weeks in an average month comes out to 1428.90. Oh, typo, Rachel. Thank you. I'm feeling better now because you're usually right. Right on the money. And probably what you did, Michelle, is just maybe go 4.3 or something. I don't know. Yes. The question in the chat is, should I be using the 4.33 figure? Yes. And I do use the 4.33. You probably use just 4.3. That's what SSA uses. That's what I use. And it seems to keep us a little closer. It can vary a little bit, as you can see. And that can get important later when we are really crunching numbers down to the dollar that we want to make sure we understand. So how does this impact his use, Steve's use of work incentives, specifically trial work period months? I'm being a little tricky here. So how does this work that he's got, that's what I'm talking about. It's because we're talking about questions that are an impact of the new job, right? So, which is a great slide title. I just love that title. I don't know why, I just do. Each month would be considered a trial work period month. Thank you, Idella. He will eat up the last 4 months. Thank you. He will use all of his, everybody is on track. Thank you. That was not a trick question. That is exactly what I wanted you to tell me. More specifically, I can tell you that he'd be using his trial work period months as a result of position. Therefore, since he has 4 trial work period months left, his last trial work period month would be September 2018. Now, how did I know that? Well, if I go back to the slide, I told you when he started working. And since we knew how many trial work period months were left, that's how we figured that out. So when will Steve's EPE begin and end, assuming work continues? When will his EPE begin and end? Now I want a date. I want dates. I want numbers. Michelle says it begins. Check the date again. Look at my slide, Michelle. Rachel says 10/28. Don't make me unmute everybody. I know some of you that aren't certified or listening in, and you might be scratching your head on these things, and I apologize if that's where you're at, because these are some questions that really require layered knowledge. Okay. Rachel says, I don't have my chart handy. I know what you're talking about, Rachel. You use that chart that Cornell uses. Okay. Well, the first date is easy, and I think Idella hit it on the head there. Okay. Let me just go back up in my chat and see. Was it Idella? Idella said he's. Oh, it was Rachel. Rachel got the start of the EPE right. It was 10/28. Okay. So really, it's the next month after the final trial work period month has been used. So 10/28 is correct. If that's the case, I'm not 28, 10/2018. You were right on that date. If that is the beginning of the EPE, when does it end? Anybody got that figured out? 9/2021. Well, Rachel, I'll tell you, you've been a good student at Cornell, and that is exactly right. That's month later. Nikki, don't make me come out to that site. So Steve's EPE would begin in October 2018 and therefore would end September 2021 precisely. Now, what if Steve stops working? Is his EPE still going to end on September 2021 if he stops working in, let's say, December of 2018? Is that going to change the dates? I changed my question, Rachel. My first question was, will it still end at the same date? And everybody's saying, yep, it sure will. And that is sort of a trick question, because I want you to understand that when the EPE begins, it will end 3 years later, whether the person's working or not. Okay, so Rachel, you do bring up a good point. I didn't want to go there. I probably should have put a different date out. She says that in December, if it could be considered unsuccessful work attempt. We would use unsuccessful work attempt to prevent maybe SSA from, looking at cease and benefits even for months that they could. And I was thinking about going down that path, but I didn't want to make it that complicated. But Rachel, you're on the right path there too. The gist is, I want you to understand that when somebody's EPE begins, it will end 3 years later. Okay. Once it's initiated, that ship has sailed. Okay. It's really, it's going to come and go. So we want to use it effectively. We want people to know that's how it works so that we can do some planning. So, no more questions for you. Will this part-time position be worth foregoing benefits for Steve and his family? If not, what should you do next to support it? So I really want you to address that question for me. I think this really gets at the heart of our understanding of what we should be doing through Aiden for folks. Rachel says it won't be worth it. We could look at IRWI and subsidy. Other thoughts?
So, Kevin, it's Michelle. I think since the job is going to potentially become full-time in 6 months, I don't know. I think it might be worth it.
Okay.
Because then I did the math with the 4.33 figure, and he'd be making 2857.8 a month.
Once he goes full-time, you mean?
Once he goes full-time.
So that's pretty decent then. At full-time,
right.
you're feeling pretty good about the situation, right?
Right.
Okay.
So,
I'm with you.
yeah, that's my input.
I like that input. I think
okay.
that's good input. Rachel says, but we could hold off cessation until full-time starts. It's like dueling concepts here. I love it. Love it. Okay. I'm going to say, and all I really asked, although I do appreciate, Michelle, where you're coming from, that you're looking forward. You're looking at the future. Now, the thing that would suck in that scenario is, what if they didn't give him the full-time job in 6 months, right? And we don't know that part of the equation. So playing it kind of safe, I mean, the way I would maybe look at it is that at that level, 1428.90, we sorted that out. That's a part-time starting amount. Not quite going to cut it, is it? Because we knew what his full-time family benefits are, 1788. That doesn't even replace benefit value. Now the guy would be working part-time 20 hours a week to make less for his family. Okay, so, in that just a very straight line comparison, it just doesn't work, does it? Now, Michelle, to your point, I agree with you. I think there are times we have to look at, and when I'm giving you that sort of personal break-even point when I was talking about financial viability, that's a general rule, okay? That's not an exacting science. There may be times where somebody gets into a job where it's close to that number we look at for him, what we think would be replacement value, but not quite there. But what you're thinking, like Michelle was, is, but there's advancement strategies, but there's a lot more potential in his future here, right? So Edela's saying, I would suggest IRWI or subsidy to reduce the countable earnings amount until he gets offered the full-time job. So that comes to our next question: what work incentive might help Steve maintain benefits while he's working part-time, and why? And Edela is absolutely right, and so was Michelle mentioned this earlier in chat, and so did Rachel, I think. Subsidy, yeah, I think that's where you go to with this. I gave some things in the description, which is what Michelle picked up on in chat. I saw her comment. In the description, I very specifically worded it in a way that I wanted you to pick up on, because when I'm giving you that narrative, it's like you listening to somebody's life story, you know, when you're interviewing somebody. And I hope as you learn more and more about benefits, when you're in that interview situation, your ears are kind of perking up when certain things are said. Oh, that's going on. Okay. And I'm making a note of that. This is how I used to actually do business. I used to actually have a little scrap pad of paper in front of me. And when people were telling me, you know, when I was interviewing them about their work and their activity, what they were doing, I was making all these notes because it was just fitting into place. So Rachel's saying even just an 80% subsidy would put him below SGA. I'm just gonna flip that, Rachel. I think what you're saying is even just a 20% subsidy. If just 20% of his wages were subsidized, that would put him below SGA. Right? I think that's what you mean, and that's how I'm reading that. And I agree with
that's what I meant. I said 80% because on the form you check off the percent productivity, and so that's the way that my brain went for it.
Correct. No, I got you. I totally read that. I knew what you meant, and you're right. And the answer is correct, that you are right. So based on the description of the work I gave you before, it was kind of apparent that he's being given certain considerations based on his back injury, right? And I gave you two that you could have sifted out if you looked at these, and I'm going to help you with this. One is extra help, and one is fewer or easier duties. Pretty cool. That was kind of built in there. It was baked into the cake, whether you saw it or not. I want you to think this way. I don't want you always to think to go to subsidy. I'm just saying that in Steve's situation here, it might make sense, okay? And there's more than one way to help people, okay? This is just one example. But so since he's receiving these supports, what we might call accommodations on the job, that's a flag for you to consider, the use of a work incentive, such as subsidy, right? And what does subsidy do? Just what I saw in the chat. I think Idella put this, that it reduces countable wages, potentially below SGA. Now, he did indicate two areas of assistance the SSA will look at under subsidy. Below is this form SSA 33. That's really not a work activity report, but SSA 3033 is a work activity questionnaire. And this is how SSA evaluates whether wages are subsidized or not. Actually, it's item number 5 in this form that has the 10 categories that they look at when considering whether there's subsidized wages. And which two might we check off for Steve? I already kind of told you. Fewer, easier duties. Well, based on what we were told, right? I think that's fair to say. We could say that. And what else? Extra help, folks. Extra help. When somebody else comes over and helps him with something, we could say that's getting extra help, okay, on the job. Okay, it doesn't cost anybody anything. These things just exist. Because you know they exist, your spidey senses are going off and you're saying, hey, I think that could be something that we use here. So let me ask you a couple of questions. Based on the information you've been provided, will subsidy work in this case? This is not a trick question.
I would say yes, it would work because it's not very often, but like I said, even if we said 20% of his wages were subsidized, then he would be below SGA. And so that right there would make it worthwhile.
It would make it worthwhile. And why? What are the things that you think that would make sense to Social Security that was going on in this guy's job? Do you remember from the description?
Well, they said that managers are expected to do some of the lifting, and so he's not doing that particular duty.
Okay, so that's fewer or easier duties, right?
Mhm.
Okay, let me go back to that
and
chart,
then
actually.
that he can call other people for help.
Thank you.
When lifting is required, and that right there is the extra help.
Extra help, thank you. So I was kind of cluing you in, wasn't I, on that other one? So fewer, easier duties, and also receives extra help. Perfect, Rachel, yes. And Nikki agreed with you in the chat, so thank you. So explain how that plays out. Assuming there are subsidized wages in this situation, how does that play out for him? What happens?
He'd need to give the form to a supervisor, or I generally like to facilitate that with a participant if needed, because it has to be a supervisor that works with them that fills it out.
Thank you. That was exactly what I was looking. So that practically, what happens if we're going to do this is the employer gets involved, don't they? Now, and I'm going to give you a little insight here, folks. This is something that isn't necessarily a connect the dot an obvious connection of the dots. When people complete the work activity report, now I'm going back to that report where they ask people questions about their recent work activity, right? Okay. In that form, this is sort of step one in Social Security's world. In that form, they're going to ask questions about whether there might be any assistance a person's getting on the job or whatever. Just one question in that form. And if you say no, well, Social Security may not dig further for subsidized wages. If you say yes, they will. And that's when a form will go to the employer for them to determine whether there are subsidized wages. Rachel hit on something very critical, though, which is if you want this to work smoothly, if it's okay with our participant, you should be involved. This is the one time I can think of where I would be involved with an employer and feel absolutely justified in doing so if the participant wants me involved in that way. And I'll tell you why, because if the employer gets the form, and I was talking to Nikki yesterday about this very situation, if the employer gets the form with no context at all, just getting this form from SSA, here, fill this out for us, they don't understand what this is for. They're not going to fill out that form correctly. And that's why Rachel said that she likes to facilitate that. And I wholeheartedly agree. If you want this to really go down properly and effectively, you will often need to be involved at this stage of the game. If you're not, the employer's not going to understand why they're filling this out. They're going to think it's an insult to the employee, and they're going to say, "Oh no, John is just fine," or "Steve in this case is just fine. He doesn't need any help." They're going to think they're making him look bad, when in reality, they're kind of shooting him in the foot in terms of this assistance he could get through subsidy. Aha, and Nikki's saying in regards to the example I gave you going on in her situation, that the supervisor only had worked with the individual for a month, probably didn't really understand the person very well, wasn't very involved with them, didn't know how to complete it effectively. That can happen too. Or this form can end up in the hands of an HR department where the person in HR has no clue who this employee is at all, okay, and they're trying to fill this out. It does direct them that the supervisor should fill it out, but these are things in reality that happen, folks. So if there is a time when I think that it's justified for you to be involved with an employer, this is one of those times, okay? So it is up to the employer ultimately to decide the percent of the subsidized wages. But it's your job, in my opinion, to help guide the process, because if you don't, it won't go well. Since there are 10 categories, this is just a tip I'm giving you. This is not policy, okay? And Edel is agreeing with me that sometimes the employers take this the wrong way, like we're insulting their employee, and we're not. I'd say Social Security really, but when we're in there trying to describe this, I think you have to really be delicate with that situation, because a lot of employers are going to look at this employee with great respect, which we love to see, and that's not the point of this form, okay? That's why you need to guide this process. And here's just a tip. This is not policy. This isn't how things have to go, but this is what I've used for years. Since there are 10 categories that Social Security examines, remember on that item number 5, fewer, easier duties, irregular hours, all those pieces, right? Those are the 10 categories. They look at those 10 categories that SSA examines when determining subsidized wages. Let's say in this example, 2 of those categories seem to apply to Steve, right? So you could say that potentially he has a 20% subsidy. Okay. Now, why would we maybe say that? Well, because if there are 10 categories and you've checked 2 of them, I guess you could say that maybe 20% subsidy makes sense, right? Now we got to flip that and help the employer understand that in terms of how you check it on the form. Just like Rachel was saying, oh, it's 80%. Well, I'm going to show you why she said that, okay? Because this next slide is going to show you the question the employer has to fill out that talks about that. Here we go. So if there were 2 items checked out of the 10, right, assuming that's how it was filled out in the case of Steve here, right, then we would check off that 80% of other employees' productivity. So minus 20, I guess you could say. So that's how I've looked at it. I don't know if that made sense to you, but if you got 10 categories, you check 2, I'd say, well, and I don't tell employers they have to do that. I say the other employers I've worked with might have looked at it this way, where if we have 10 categories, we check 2 boxes, we might say that each of them is valued at a 10%, in which case we would check off the 80% box of other employees' productivity. Meaning, in short, Steve has a 20% subsidy, okay? Did that make sense? So I think that's where you're helpful. I think the other piece where you're helpful in guiding an employer around subsidy is to let them know that this is not in any way devaluing their place at the business or their function or their abilities. Okay, this is just kind of looking at, this is the other thing I've told employers for years, this is a way that Social Security can honor the accommodations you're making for Steve in this case, you know, because if another employer didn't do that for Steve, maybe he wouldn't have a job, right? If he had to, if they said, oh no, you got to lift those boxes off the truck or you're gone, he wouldn't have a job, or he'd be back to the hospital, right? If he tried to do it. So that's the way I look at it, is this is a way that Social Security honors your commitment to this employee. Even though there's no cost for you to do that, you're making an accommodation for him, making it therefore possible for him to work here. So good work, employer. And that's kind of the spirit I like to present this to employers with, that this is really honoring what you're doing for your employee. And then I talk a little bit about how it affects Steve in the long run and his family. And then, you know, because people are human, they start coming around to the idea, oh, okay, so this is not hurting Steve. This is helping Steve. Exactly. And it's a temporary fix. That's the other thing I try to let employers know, that this is not, you know, we're not trying to take advantage of the system. We're trying to use incentives that exist that make sense. All right? I hope that helps you a little bit. The last tip I want to give you here about, I always tell you this because I think for me, this has always kept me straight, is that I want you to remember that gross wages minus work incentives always equals countable wages. And countable wages are what Social Security looks at to make final determinations as to whether somebody's gainfully employed or not. Okay? So in that regard, here's how it would look for Steve. His gross wage, we figured that out, right? $1428.90 minus 20% of that total, which I figured out was $285.78, equals countable wages, or $1143.12. So now Social Security is not looking at $1428.90, they're looking at $1143.12. What does that mean to Steve? Tell me what that means to Steve. Tell me what that means to Steve. Is that good for Steve? He's below SGA. Benefits won't cease. You got the idea. Okay? So, you know, now, Michelle, I don't necessarily think, you know, to your point earlier that, hey, you know, maybe he's going to go to full time. Maybe we wouldn't need to go here. That's not necessarily a wrong view either. But if things don't go the way we hope, then this is sort of kind of, in my mind, I guess is sort of like a safe way to make sure that, at least for a short period of time, this is going to protect him and his family's going to his family's going to be taken care of, and his path back to work is going to be a little more secure. He's going to feel a little more confident about this moving forward. So just you know, every situation is different, but in this case, it works out very nicely because well, I helped to create this case study. Okay, so that's how subsidy would play out in this case. All right, let me get you to the next slide here. So again, I already covered this with you, but just remember, Social Security looks at the countable wages. Okay, now he's below SGA. All right. Here's another interesting question I want to get across to you. How does subsidy development impact our EN payments? Okay, so now we dealt with Steve. He's happy. He thinks you're a rock star for helping him keep his life together financially better than he expected for a longer period of time. So what does it do for us? How does it affect us? Anybody know that answer?
Kevin, it's Michelle again.
Hi, Michelle.
Hey, I don't think it would impact payments at all because he's still earning above SGA. So even if he, yeah, I mean, I think that's it, right? Because it doesn't matter if he continues to receive his benefits because his earned income is above SGA. Therefore, we would continue to get payments.
Well, let's stick with me for a minute. I agree. In a way, okay, it has a minor impact, Michelle. Okay.
Okay.
Since he doesn't have VR history, and we knew this from earlier information, he's not worked with another EN, and since previous work wouldn't impact phase 1 milestones, Aiden in this example would be eligible for the phase 1 milestones based on his work activity, right? Now that's only trial work level, but if Steve continues to work at this part-time job at that level, even though the subsidy is in play, we would still be eligible for phase 2 milestones. You're right, because his earnings are over SGA. But if he continues to be in receipt of federal cash benefits, we would not be eligible for outcomes, only the phase 2 milestones, right? Okay, so that's the difference. That's the distinction, is that when you're above SGA, we can still capture phase 1 and 2 milestones. But to get to outcome status, the person has to be above SGA and no longer in receipt of any federal cash benefits. Okay, so I mean, I think in this scenario, you did the right thing. And let me just say this, and this comes from the heart. I really believe this, that when we're doing the right thing by our participants, the money will follow. It's not that I always want you focused on the money. That's not the point. But I do want you to understand how the payments work. Okay, but in this case, you're still going to get the phase 1 and 2 milestones. Now, here's a little update for you as we wrap this case study up. Steve continues to work part-time, and in October 2017, I think I forgot to change that date. Actually, that's supposed to be October 18. He's offered full-time employment. I thought I got all those changed, but I see I didn't change some dates. He's now going to be working 40 hours a week at $17.50. So he got that offer of full-time work, okay? And he's going to be making $3,031 per month in gross wages. I just kept it simple for you. He has the option of employer-sponsored health care at a reasonable cost. He's excited about the prospects of now working full-time, but needs further guidance regarding his benefits. So here's where I like to play out this chart and sort of, now those dates at the bottom in those boxes are right. We figured out that his last trial work period month was 2018, September, right? And we figured that if that was the case, continuing forward, then his EPE would end on September 2021, right? So here's some final benefits questions. And I like people to see kind of this visual when things are going to play out and so forth. So the last questions I have for you today are about his benefits again. Steve is eligible for a grace period. When would SSA determine that would occur? And I'm going to give you, just for a second, I'm going to give you this to look at. I think that'll help you. So when would SSA determine that his grace period would have occurred? Assuming October 2018 is the date, not October 2017. Any thoughts on that?
Are we assuming that October 2018 is the first month he's making $3,031?
Mm-hmm.
Then that would be the first month for grace period. And then he'd have the following month in his cessation month. So he'd have October, November, December, where he could still get a check, and then it would cease.
Perfect. You got it right. So October 2018 would be his cessation month, and the following, that's his first cessation month. And the next 2 months, right, Rachel, that follow would constitute that grace period. So therefore, you're right. It would be October through December 2018. And Adela had it right too there, October 2018. I'm sorry, September. Actually, it's not September, Adela, because September, if I go back, I just want to show you the chart again. September was the last trial work period month he used, making October 2018 the first month of EPE. And really, we can't establish grace period until we're beyond the trial work period, okay? Just to be clear, I want to make sure we're all on the same page always, as much as possible. All right, what will happen to Steve's Medicare benefits? Will he still be eligible? Rachel says yes. Darn right he will. For how long, minimum? Ebel says yes. Rachel says 93 months, and that is the correct response. We know, at a minimum, he's going to continue to receive his Medicare for at least 93 months after the trial work period has been completed, which is September 2018 in this example. So we know from that point on, we got 93 months. That's a long time to sort out business, right? And figure life out for insurance. And trust me, I think, folks, you better know a lot more about these numbers and these promises and guarantees than ever with all these changes to healthcare and the concerns that people have about healthcare, these folks should know that they're going to stay tied to this. Now, the best solution, I think, in this world of wackiness with healthcare is to be attached to an employer-sponsored plan. So in this scenario, Steve's got plenty of time to sort out if his employer-sponsored plan is a better deal, doesn't he? I think 93 months we can figure a few things out, right? So that's kind of why we have that period of time. Oops, I showed you that too quickly. How are the Medicare premiums handled if there's no disability cash benefit being paid to Steve? Because at 31, I think that was his gross wage, 31, yep. He's not going to get cash benefits anymore. Here's another thing I want you to know. At 31 in wages, when he goes full time, does that subsidy work anymore? No, that subsidy's gone. That subsidy was used effectively as a bridge to get him to full-time employment, wasn't it? Now, because that allowed him to go a little bit over the SGA level, 20%, but not $3,000. So that's gone. That bridge has been crossed, okay? So let's be clear about that. Now back to insurance. How is it handled if he has no disability check? I'm going to look in, okay, and then I got to scroll up here a minute. I have great answers. Pay out of pocket 3 months at a time, I believe. This is Rachel. Michelle says, yeah, and he has to pay. If employer-sponsored plan is better than Medicare, then how does Steve terminate Medicare? That's a great question. I'm going to answer that. He would have to pay the Medicare premium. So everybody's got the right idea. So let me just give you the answer. They will bill him quarterly for Part B premiums, which he needs to pay out of pocket. Okay? Now, to Mary Lynn's question, if you have insurance available through an employer that's either what they call comparable or creditable, and when it comes to Part B, it's comparable. When it comes to Part D, it's creditable, meaning it's as good as, if not better than, what you have now. And most employer-sponsored plans will be. I'm bringing this up for a reason, because you can drop Part B. Okay, and if your employer-sponsored plan is comparable, that means if you have to go back to Part B, which you can during the open enrollment window, there will be no penalty for you dropping Part B. So that's your answer, Mary Lynn, and that's something I used to look at people with people carefully, because why should they be paying 109 bucks a month this year, so $300 something a quarter for bad insurance, or insurance that's not as good as what they have through their employer. So that is another piece we should counsel people on. And if their employer-sponsored plan is comparable, and by the way, I used to tell people, call your insurance company and ask them if it's comparable to, in terms of Medicare Part B, okay? And they will know exactly what you mean, and they will say yes or no. And I've even had somebody get a letter to that effect, in case down the road they had to join Part B again, Medicare Part B, during an open enrollment window, and if there was any question about paying a penalty, then we had that letter on file. You don't need to do that. I think in most cases it's not going to be a problem, but that's how it works. If your insurance is as good as, if not better than, i.e. comparable, then you're in good shape. You could advise that the person could drop it if they chose to, with no penalty down the road if they have to come back to Medicare. Good question. So another way we can help people save money, always looking at the big picture in terms of their financial security. Good stuff. Final questions for you. When would Steve's benefit terminate, assuming he keeps working? When would Steve's benefit terminate? Rachel says 10/2021. And no one is even messing with you, Rachel. They're all just like, okay, Rachel's got the dates. We're going with what Rachel says because I see no other comments. Okay. Okay. Nikki, you take care of that business there. Rachel, ding, ding, ding. Absolutely right again. That's exactly right. It would terminate the first month outside of the EPE after completion. Thank you, Idella. And that was a good way to answer if you didn't know the exact date, because you're still right. After that completion of the EPE, he's well over SGA. That's when they would terminate, not cease. Okay, last question. What if Steve has to stop working? What work incentive could be used to help him get back to benefits? Good, Idella. Good, Rachel. Now, tougher question. Until what date could this incentive be used? $60 months out from what, Rachel?
From benefit termination, from the month the benefit terminates.
So if he terminates October 2021, that means you're telling me he's got until September 2026 to use EXR, right?
Yes. Yes.
Good job. That would be correct. Now, we didn't have this in the past, folks, when we were trying to operate, employment programs in years past. And let me tell you, this is, to me, this is the game changer, okay? Okay, and Michelle says, and with unsuccessful work attempt, it's within a 6-month period, correct? Yeah, so that's a totally different incentive, Michelle, but if somebody does have to stop working within a 6-month period, it could be considered an unsuccessful work attempt. And sort of, I guess the easiest way to look at it is not even count in Social Security's eyes, okay? But EXR, this is kind of on the other end of the spectrum. Unsuccessful work attempt might be used way up earlier in the process, okay, when people are first trying to work. I'm looking at way at the other end of this process when Steve has gone beyond termination now, and now he's out maybe 3-4 years and has to stop working because of that back injury cropping up again. So now he won't be really upset with Rachel for convincing him that he could get back to work full time. Instead, she's going to help use that last ace we have up our sleeve, which is this powerful work incentive called expedited reinstatement of benefits. I think this is really the game changer today, folks. I do. Very good. So you can see a lot of different things were looked at. Not all work incentives were used. You know, it wasn't a case study to show you how every single work incentive that exists is something we would use. And Rachel, I agree with you. Rachel puts in the chat, you usually hear a sigh of relief when you tell people about EXR. I agree, Rachel, because because the last question when I talk about termination is okay, and that's what would happen if things continue. And then there's always this puzzle or this concerned look, and I'm like, I bet you're wondering what would happen if after all this and you get terminated, you had to stop working because of your condition again, right? And that's when we hear that sigh of relief Rachel's talking about when we explain there is a backdoor to Social Security if things go south, okay? So this case study was to show you that really this wasn't even a super complicated case study. This is more like things that might happen and do happen. This is a typical story, really. I've worked with somebody just like Steve and decided to come our way instead of ER. Actually, more than one person like Steve has done that. But, and then when to use work incentives is as important as knowing which incentives exist, right? You really have to know how to weave these work incentives in like you're stitching a quilt together almost. That's what it feels like to me anyway. So here's some progress updates about Steve's life now and prior to ticket assignment. Remember, he came to you over a year ago with family income of $21,456. That includes the dependent benefits that the family was receiving. After increasing his skills, he took a year to do that. And returning to work full-time, Steve's family income has now increased to $36,372 per year. Not shabby, pretty big increase. He will have room to grow in the company he works for and will be provided cost of living adjustments that far outpace any annual SSDI benefits adjustments or COLAs that people on benefits receive, okay? And I think we would all agree with that. If you work for an agency, and most agencies try to do that and far outpace, it's not going to be like 0.8%, okay? He is now saving for retirement again, fantastic, and with an employer matched 401k. And he's, by the way, you should be, anybody who has that chance to match should be matching. His taxes and his taxes from earnings will improve his eventual SSA retirement benefit amount, of course, right? He's putting more credits of coverage in the system. If Steve's health becomes an issue in the future, there's an option to return to benefits. We call expedited reinstatement of benefits. The thing that makes people sigh with a breath of relief, according to Rachel, which I agree with. You bet, Rachel. Thanks for joining us today. I am actually done now with this last slide anyway. And here's our last slide, the big picture. While it's typical individuals may utilize VR services first, and it often is, in this situation, it's possible to find necessary funding through other means, just like Steve did, right? Work incentives can help become a bridge in some cases, not an anchor, please, not an anchor, but a bridge. And I think that's what this example showed us, how to use it as a bridge to preserve benefits until the time that it becomes, you know, reasonable that the person has finances that secure their position without benefits. Finally, understanding SSA work incentives and providing that roadmap to participants about how benefits are impacted allows for informed choice, removes fear, and it's certainly a wise investment of staff time that's going to lead to improved employment outcomes. So there you go, folks. There's the story of Steve. I know I brought you right to the top of the last hour we were supposed to be in. I wasn't sure how long this would go. Are there any last questions or thoughts? Post them in the chat or unmute your line. I don't want to hold you much longer. I just wanted to make sure I give just a minute if there were any questions.